Good evening, everyone. Welcome. Nice to see you again on this slightly balmy winter's night. My name's Jeremy, and I'm leading these sessions this month. And the theme that we've been examining is afflictive emotions or afflictive mental states. Haven't quite decided on the term yet. There's a few different terms used for these afflictive mental states, and how they are based on, well, firstly, how they afflict us, how they cause us problems. That's the first thing. And then how they arise based on mistaken understanding or mistaken view or delusion. That's the idea. So that's the idea that we're exploring and doing some meditation on and having good discussions about. So as I said previously, when I'm presenting these ideas, you're encouraged to raise objections, and the Buddha encouraged people to challenge his ideas. That's the best way to learn, sharing ideas, and you come up with your view and I come back with my view. So dialectical way of learning is the best way to, particularly with matters to do with meditation and spiritual teachings, I think. So we approach them with open mind and understanding that there's many different views. Even within Buddhism there's many different views, and it's generally agreed that the Buddha taught different things to different people at different times, and they could be somewhat contradictory, so it's led to centuries of debate amongst different Buddhist schools about which one is the final view of the Buddha. So that's interesting. So that's encouraged. So if I say things that don't sound quite right, just make a mental note and feel free to ask questions and make a comment. So we'll do some meditation and I'll talk a bit and then we'll have some discussion. So we'll start off by doing some meditation. And as I said previous weeks, meditation just means familiarizing your mind with a positive object, a positive mental object. So just getting your mind used to a positive mental object, so one that makes your mind peaceful. But this also includes investigating your mind to find things in your mind that are stopping you from being peaceful or disturbing your mind. So that's analytical meditation or introspection. So that's also part of meditation. But now we'll do a concentration meditation, which is just mostly focusing on the breath. And as I've said previously, the main two tools or mental faculties we need to firstly identify and then employ for meditation is firstly mindfulness, which in this context means keeping the object in your mind, the chosen object, which in this case is our breath. So it's keeping it in mind, remembering it. And then introspection, which is observing to see whether your mind has wandered off to something else or whether it's staying on the object. So they're the two main tools or mental faculties we need to use to keep our mind focused. So firstly, just relax your body and your mind and take a minute to stop thinking about all the things that you've been busy with today, all the things going on in your life. Just take a break from that for the next 20 minutes. And just be aware of your body and check that your body is relaxed. Let go of any tension you're holding in your body. And then bring your attention to your breath and observe your breath moving in and out. It can be helpful to visualize that as you breathe out, you're expelling any disturbing emotions such as stress or irritation or something that's bothering you. It can be helpful to imagine you're expelling that as you breathe out. And as you're breathing in sort of peaceful energy that's calming your mind. And as I was saying last week, it's also important to think about your motivation, like why am I doing this? So just spend a minute thinking about that. So if you ask yourself, why am I doing this? Then you would probably say, to calm my mind down, to make my mind more peaceful, and to develop habits of having a peaceful mind, and to overcome afflictive states of mind, things that are disturbing me, causing problems in my life, and also causing problems for other people in my life, such as anger and stress and anxiety. So we think you're doing not just for yourself, but also for the people around you, the people you share your life with. And try to expand that to include as many people as you can. So all the people that you interact with, you work with or study with, family and friends. Just you think that I'm doing this also so that I can be at least not harmful to others, and if possible to also be beneficial or helpful to them. So then turn your attention just to your breath and the sensation of the breath moving in and out past the tip of your nose, just underneath the tip of your nose. It's helpful to focus on that point. So we're resting our attention on that point. Or some people say you're just observing or being merely aware of your mind resting on that point. So mindfulness is keeping that object of meditation in mind, the breath. It's remembering to keep your mind there. And introspection is checking to see whether your mind has wandered off or is staying there. So I think the experience is like your mind is resting, as in it doesn't have to be busy at the moment, so it's sort of enjoying the rest, being still, but is also alert to make sure it stays resting on that point. So it doesn't require a lot of force, you're just sort of resting your mind there. But it does require alertness to check whether it's staying there. And if you find it helpful, you can count your breaths. So breathing in and out would be one breath. Some people find it helpful to do that to keep your mind on the job and not wander off. So you just keep counting up until you lose track, and then you start again. So if your mind wanders off, you just bring it back. Just place it on that point. Try to keep it there, using mindfulness and introspection. Okay, so now that our minds have some degree of concentration and clarity, we'll use that to do a analytical meditation or introspective meditation, and this is on attachment and aversion. So the purpose of this meditation is just to notice that a lot of our daily experience is made up of being attracted towards pleasant things and having an aversion or being repelled by unpleasant things. So we'll just fly through our normal daily activities, or walk through, and so starting with a normal day in your life, so starting with waking up, and the idea is just to observe all the things that you experience in a normal day, and particularly noticing the things that you label pleasant and are drawn towards, and label unpleasant and that you try to steer away from. So for example, first thing in the morning you might wake up in your nice warm bed on a cold winter's morning, and you feel how nice it is to be in your warm bed. So that's pleasant. And then the alarm goes off and you've got to get up out of your nice warm bed into the cold. So that's unpleasant. For me anyway, most people. And then you maybe get into a nice warm shower, so that's pleasant. And then maybe the hot water runs out, so that's unpleasant. So you just run through your normal activities just in your mind. Eating breakfast, getting dressed. And the idea is just to observe how things are appearing as pleasant or unpleasant. So like the food you eat for breakfast, maybe walking to the station, a pleasant walk, or it could be raining, which is unpleasant and you get wet. Catching a train, maybe the train's too crowded, which is unpleasant. Getting off the train and buying nice coffee, just pleasant. Smiling face of the person making your coffee is pleasant. Running late for work, it's unpleasant. Frowning face of your boss is unpleasant. Smiling face of your colleagues is pleasant. So everyone's day is different, so just think about your normal activities and just make a mental note of how things appear. Either pleasant or unpleasant. Some things are just neutral, we don't label them either pleasant or unpleasant. So then your work you're doing, maybe having some frustration, irate client or customer, unpleasant. Something going well, solving some problem is pleasant. So the purpose of this meditation is just to observe how so much of our experience is made up of experiencing things as pleasant and unpleasant, and being drawn towards things that are pleasant, or wanting to draw them towards us, and trying to steer away from things that are unpleasant, or trying to push them away. So it's just observing that experience that we all go through, that we all have. Okay, thank you. We'll just end the meditation there. Any comments or questions about that meditation before I move on? So, as I said, the purpose of that meditation is just to observe that fact of our daily experience, which is something we share with everyone, which is that so much of our experience is made up of that dynamic of seeing things as pleasant and unpleasant, and then sort of being pulled towards the pleasant and trying to push away the unpleasant. So that's an interesting thing to notice, and it takes up a big part of our experience, and it's so much a part of our experience that we just think it's normal, I think, and normally don't really pay much attention to it. Anyway, we can discuss that more later, and you might disagree with that analysis. Okay, so just to maybe recap a little bit some of the things that we've covered, and I'll talk more about attachment and aversion as we were just meditating on. So as I was saying, from the Buddhist point of view, and I think this is something maybe we can all agree on, the Dalai Lama often starts his talks by talking about how all beings wish to have happiness and to be free from suffering. So that's an interesting idea, probably fairly obvious, but I think it's something we can agree on. Maybe not. Sometimes when I say that, people don't agree. But it's a good place to start a discussion on spiritual practice, I think. So let's assume we all agree with it. That's basically what we are trying to achieve, is we all want to be happy and to avoid suffering. And as the Dalai Lama often says, that it's our birthright. It's something the Buddhist says, that it is our birthright to be happy. So we all deserve to be happy all of the time. That's also an interesting idea, I think, that we tend not to think that we all deserve to be happy all of the time, because we feel, I think, that we have a lot of faults and problems, and that somehow We don't deserve to be happy because we have these faults and make these mistakes. But at least from the Buddhist point of view, we all have this sort of birthright. We all deserve to be happy all of the time. And despite the fact that we all are striving for happiness and trying to avoid problems, we continue to experience various problems, small and large. And even though we've tried many different things to achieve lasting happiness, generally we find that we're still experiencing various kinds of problems and not achieving the lasting happiness that we are striving for. So again, feel free to disagree with these ideas, but from the Buddhist point of view, that's kind of what our experience is, that we haven't been able to achieve the sort of lasting, reliable happiness that we're striving for, and are continuing to experience various types of problems. So if we accept that, then the next thing is is there a solution to that problem? And from the Buddhist point of view, there is a solution. And the Buddhist argument is that because these problems we're experiencing are primarily in the mind, of course we do have physical problems and external problems, but we're experiencing them with our mind. And so the Buddha argued that because we're experiencing these problems with our mind, and because they are impermanent, it shows that they're arising because of causes and conditions. So something's causing them to arise. They're not there all the time. So these problems arise. You think of, let's say, anxiety, for example. So we don't feel anxious all the time. It comes and goes. Sometimes very strongly, other times not at all. So there's something that's causing the anxiety to arise at some times. So it could be triggered by an external situation or event, or it could just arise, for no obvious reason. But because it's not there all the time, it shows that something's causing it to arise. It has causes. And the Buddha's argument is that because it's a mental thing happening in the mind, that the cause is also mental. So that's an interesting argument, which you could also debate about. So the idea is that because it's in nature of the mind, that the primary cause of that thing also has to be found in the mind. I think there's some neuroscientists who would disagree with that. They would argue that it's caused by a chemical or some physical substance. So that's an interesting thing to investigate, to consider. So the Buddhist idea is that, so we have this mind, and often the analogy is like the mind being like a sky and clear, and that the mental afflictions are like clouds passing through this clear sky. So some clouds are dark and stormy, some are light and fluffy, but they're all not actually part of the mind. The word is often used adventitious, which means they're impermanent and also not in the nature of the mind. So that's the idea, to think of your mind as being by nature clear, but these things arise up: stress, attachment, anger, jealousy. All these things arise, but they're not in the nature of the mind. And the argument is because they're impermanent, because they don't not there all the time, it shows that they are arising because of causes and conditions, and when the causes and conditions cease, then they fade. So then, if we accept all that, then the question is, what is it within our mind that is disturbing it? What is making it, preventing it from being happy all the time and achieving lasting happiness? And so that's, when we're talking, that's how the idea of afflictive emotions. So these are mental afflictions. And we were talking just then, in that meditation we were looking at attraction and aversion. So this is a big theme in Buddhism. Normally the terms used are attachment and aversion. So what the Buddha is saying here is that because we have this constant dynamic going on of seeing things as attractive and being drawn towards them, or wanting to draw them towards us, and on the other hand seeing other things as unpleasant and unattractive and trying to push them away, that we have this sort of constant battle going on in our minds. So that's an interesting idea, because I think normally when we think about things out there in the world, that we think of them as being, I guess, inherently pleasant or unpleasant, that we're just reacting to what they are. But the Buddha is saying is that when we analyse, we find that the pleasant and unpleasant qualities that we see in them are actually projected by our own mind onto them. So that's an interesting idea, because normally you walk down the street and someone glares at you in an unpleasant manner, you just think, oh, that was unpleasant, that look. Or, really loud motorbike screams past and gives you a fright, you think, that was unpleasant. So we don't think of that unpleasant thing, being labelled by our mind. But what the Buddha is saying here is that these are actually projections coming from our mind, that these labels of good or the good and bad qualities that we're perceiving are actually labelled onto that object by our mind. So that's quite, I think, a radical idea, and we need to investigate. Well, is that true? Do those things have those qualities of good and bad? So you take, for example, think of a person that you generally regard as unpleasant. So maybe some politician might come to mind, someone who each time you think of them you think that person is unpleasant. So the idea here is that unpleasantness that we're seeing in them, and when we're thinking of that person as unpleasant, we're thinking of that quality as being somehow inherent in that person, that somehow that they are intrinsically unpleasant. But when we analyse that, we find that it's quite hard to verify that. It doesn't really stand up to analysis. So, for example, that person we regard as unpleasant might have someone else who thinks they're wonderful and lovely. So then you just think, well, they're obviously deluded because this person is unpleasant and they just can't see it. But you have to ask, who is right and who is wrong here. So we're labelling them unpleasant because of a feeling that we get when we think of them, or something they represent to us which we find maybe threatening. I was thinking then of a politician who I find him unpleasant because I think he's deceitful. I think he's pretending to be something that he's not, and he's I think maybe harmful. He's actually harming people. So that's the qualities that I'm seeing in him, and maybe that's true. But when I'm projecting that unpleasantness onto him, I'm seeing it as somehow inherent, in him as a findable sort of quality. Whereas, his, daughter or best friend might think that he's wonderful, and they're labelling him as wonderful because of, something wonderful that he's done for them. Maybe he gave them his kidney, or, millions of dollars, or I don't know, something. So it raises the question of, who's right and who's wrong. And another way to analyse this is, we'll take, for example, a thing that we regard as attractive. So like your favourite food, for example. Like coffee, really good coffee, for example, or chocolate maybe, whatever. So you think, that thing is delicious. whenever I think of it, that's my idea of delicious. And so we are projecting this quality of deliciousness onto this substance. But if it was, if it did possess that deliciousness, then every time we drank it or ate it, we would have to experience that deliciousness. But that's contrary to our experience, because we do find sometimes that food that we regard as delicious sometimes doesn't taste good, or if we eat too much of it, for example, it stops tasting good and can become revolting. Or sometimes our mind is just distracted and we're busy thinking about something else, so the experience of deliciousness doesn't come up. So the point here is that, and as Dalai Lama often says, if that object possessed that quality that you're seeing in it, that pleasant or unpleasant quality, then if it was there in the way that you think it's there, then it should become clearer and clearer the more you analyze. But we find that when we analyze the object, or the more we experience it, that it doesn't become clearer that that person is unpleasant, or that food is delicious. So the idea here is that these qualities are coming from our mind. We're projecting onto the object, but then they're appearing back to us as being very convincingly coming from that object. So in the Buddhist texts, often the example of the body is used. So for us humans, it's quite common for us to be very attracted to human body, other people's bodies, and so we can become extremely attached to another person's body and see it as perfect, for example. And but then it's not hard to analyze the body and see that the body does have imperfections. And when we're seeing that body as perfect, there's a whole lot of things about the body that we're ignoring. So, for example, the internal organs. If you look at internal organs, generally you wouldn't regard them as attractive, or the various substances that the body produces, such as waste substances or blood, etc. So we don't normally regard them as attractive. But when we see a beautiful body, we just forget about all that, and we're just seeing this thing as exquisite and perfect, and it appears to be coming from the side of the object, that beauty or that exquisiteness, that perfection. So it shows the power of the mind to project these qualities onto an object, and then they are read back as coming from that object, but being completely convincing. And we can do this about almost any object, a car or a house, a person, dog, cat. Overseas trip, a friend of mine loves Paris, and she's always going back to Paris. So for her, Paris is sort of like perfect. But, she admits that she doesn't always have a fabulous time when she goes to Paris. So in her mind, Paris is sort of representing something sort of beautiful and rich and interesting and enjoyable, and so she's seeing that. But she's also, she's a Buddhist, and we have these discussions, and so she said, yeah, of course, not everyone living in Paris is blissfully happy. They're having riots quite often these days, so those people are obviously not happy. So it's an idea in her mind of Paris, that she loves and goes back to all the time. But she's saying, yeah, of course, it's not perfect. There's many problems. So anyway, I'd be interested to hear what you think about that, because basically what I'm saying is that these things are appearing to our mind in a certain way, but the way they're appearing to us is based on our own projection. So it's sort of like they're like our creation, and then we're reading them back as being external, and we're reacting them to them. And so why is this a problem? It's a problem because these attitudes of attachment and aversion form the basis of a lot of our afflictive emotions. So that meditation we did before, we're sort of thinking of things that are not really, we don't have strong attachment and aversion to. They're sort of fairly neutral. You just notice that, they come and go. But many of the things that really bother us, like, things that arise from attachment are things like very strong desire and craving. And then from that you get things like addiction. So we're getting addicted to a substance or a activity like gambling. So these are coming from attachment because your mind is projecting very strongly onto that thing that is so interesting for your mind that it becomes so obsessed by that thing. It can be a substance or a person or activity. And so then addiction can happen, and that can be very self-destructive, as we know. And then things like discontentment comes from attachment. So this sort of feeling that you can't sort of be content doing what you're doing. You always sort of looking outside for something better, looking for a better life, better partner, better job, more stuff. So this kind of discontentment. And jealousy obviously comes from attachment. So if we're strongly attached to somebody or something, and then someone has that thing that we want, then we'll feel strongly jealous, and that can lead to, even to harming that person. And depression can come from attachment, because if we're strongly attached to something and we can't have it, then we can develop depression because of that, whether it's a person or boredom is also a product of attachment. And then harmful actions, like stealing out of strong attachment, just taking other people's stuff because we feel like we deserve to have it more than they do. And then aversion is also forming the basis for a lot of these disturbing emotions. So this sort of builds up gradually, aversion. Like, for example, with people, we have a sort of aversion, find someone unpleasant, but then that can develop into a strong, dislike for them. We become more invested in our aversion, and then irritation and contempt and strong anger and hatred, and then we can sort of take action to actually sort of harm them or turn other people against them through speech or so that's the point, is that these afflictions are, a lot of them are arising based on attachment and aversion, and the attachment and aversion is arising based on the qualities that we're projecting onto things. So it's coming from our own mind, and we're reading it back. And based on that, we're developing these mental afflictions. So there's a lot in that. That's kind of like the whole Buddhist path in a nutshell. Well, part of the path anyway. But I'd be interested to hear what you think about that, and whether that rings true to you. I mean, can you see, well, firstly, the idea that the qualities of the attractiveness and unattractiveness, do you agree that they are projections of our mind, or maybe slightly projections of our mind, but also partly coming from the side of the object, or what do you think about that? Any thoughts? Yes.
It's kind of like contradictory in a way, because it's the balance of two thoughts. Spoke earlier about the happiness aspect of it. We have the right to be happy.
Yeah.
And if you follow that path, take the short-term slightness of that, you kind of end up with a lot of the bad things, a lot of things you don't want. TikTok would be a great example. Yeah. Indulging in chocolate would be another example. So if you follow the short-sighted happiness aspect of it, and that's where you develop your habits, where we're very habitual creatures. So yeah, it's very tough to balance if you follow could lead to that thing in the future. But then again, contradictory to the fact that you don't want to always be living for the future and not living for the now.
Right.
That's all kind of balances each other out.
Yeah. So maybe just to paraphrase what you're saying, that if we sort of follow our attachments, and for example, you're saying like TikTok, so we just spend all our time following our interests, maybe on social media, and then it causes problems in terms of like, well, can make your mind quite agitated, I think, and wasting time and etc. But you're saying that if we follow, we're doing that because we're seeking happiness, aren't we? But yeah, so is that what you're saying? But and then there's a trade-off between long-term.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Or it could be chocolate or anything. Like it brings you joy, and that's the dopamine aspect that they're trying to recreate in a digital form. The same as the chocolate, the same as the car. So if the aspect is to always be happy, if you were to do that, it seems to bring you less happiness if it's following habits for an object.
Yeah. So are you saying that does make you happy, or it doesn't?
It doesn't seem to if you follow happiness in the short term.
I see, yeah.
I mean, like the things that bring you more joy in the longer term tend to be the things that don't necessarily bring you joy in the things that
I see, yeah. So what would be an example, like, working towards like studying at university so you can get a degree and a good job eventually, for example?
Yeah. A family, a degree, a job.
Yeah.
Pretty much anything, a business.
Yeah.
A vacation, anything in that aspect. They typically, you hear people when they have families, don't do it. But it's actually the thing that doesn't, or if you
In the long term,
business,
yeah.
Don't build business because actually it's the most stressful, horrible thing you can do is eating glass. But 20 years down the line,
They're glad they did it. Yeah.
So it very much did not bring joy and happiness in that very short.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I see that. Yeah. Yeah. So I think the idea here is that we need to examine carefully, firstly, whether that is happiness, I think. So I think the Buddhist idea is that if we're engaging something out of attachment, that our mind isn't actually happy, it's not experiencing peace. Because you're seeing an object and you're wanting it and you're trying to hold on to it and bring it closer. But the problem is that we don't actually have control over that object. So whether it's a person or substance or an object, it's something that outside of us. For example, we don't have much control over it. We have some control sometimes, but not total control. So that's a cause for anxiety. Or it's a person, we can't really control what they do. And the attachment also, because they're impermanent, that they're going to come and go. So that also produces a problem when they leave, or when we become bored with them, or they no longer appear attractive, or we're no longer enjoying it. So that's the permanence of the experience that we're having with that object. So yeah, the Buddha is saying that attachment is actually destroying our peace of mind. It's causing us not to be happy. So whether you're talking about a long-term thing or a short-term thing, the problem is that the external things are external. So they can produce some satisfaction. We all experience that, but because they're external, they're not able to be the cause for the sort of lasting happiness that we're searching for. That's the idea. Because they're external. Yeah, they're not in the mind. Yes, sorry, you had a question.
So, according to Buddhism, how does one know when one is experiencing happiness?
Yeah, that's a good question. So in some Buddhist texts, they say that the only reason we're attached to these things is because we haven't experienced profound bliss, for example, in meditation. And if we experience that, then we would lose interest in these things, like the pleasure we get from eating, for example, in comparison to the bliss that we would experience through meditation would seem unpleasant in comparison. So I think it's a relative thing. Like what we label as happiness is relative to other things that we label as unhappiness. But generally you would say whatever you label happiness is happiness for you at the time. But on the other hand, we can be attracted to something which is actually harming us too. And the analogy of the moth and the flame is used. We become so transfixed by something that appears so beautiful and so amazing that we're drawn towards it and don't even notice that it's harming us, that it's actually, even destroying us. So that's an interesting idea. But generally you would say that happiness is what you label happiness. So what's happiness for you? Yeah. Mm. Yeah. So I don't think I really answered your question very well. Maybe someone else could have a go at answering your question. I'm still thinking about that. Any other thoughts about that? Trading off long-term happiness. Yeah.
Sort of, to me, reminds me of the talk Damien gave a while ago.
Yeah.
I'll be happy when I achieve this, and I'll have basically long-term
Right.
goals that are outside the immediate grasp.
Yeah.
And the example of starting up a business or something.
Yeah.
Short-term pain, long-term gain. It's there's a bit in common there.
Yeah.
Which brings us back to your definition, the explanation you offered, by way of the definition of happiness, which is it's what we label as happiness. So when I think back to that example, those examples that Damien offered a while ago, I found that very powerful because I think that a lot of marketing these days is obviously geared at you'll be happy when you get that car, or whatever the objective is that someone's trying to sell you, but the idea that you can sort of find happiness or choose to be happy right now and define it the way you want to, to me that seems like a really powerful concept.
It's a bit like a clear thinking exercise,
Right?
a bit like a clear thinking exercise.
In what way?
Well, just to listen to these two gentlemen talk, it's like you've got to be really clear in the way you think about what is being presented. It's really hard to do because I think, when you read things and you think, oh, I love that, and it works for a while, and you think, oh, I love that, that's really helpful. Like, it's not what you experience, it's how you relate to it.
Right.
I'll carry around that in my head for weeks. I'm like, that's really good. It's not. It's because that's the Buddhist concept. It's not that you twisted your ankle when you walked out of Aldi. It's well, okay. So now I can't work for 3 days. Now I'll finish my thesis, or I'll write to my mother, or I'll write a poem. So is a sprained ankle terrible, or is it because then I was forced to have some downtime and it was a positive thing? So it's not what you experience, it's how you relate to it.
Okay, yeah.
We're so highly conditioned to outcome. That's kind of another theme. And there's that lovely story about, is it good or is it bad? The business, the baby,
With the guy that fell off the horse, that story, is that the one you're talking about?
Yeah.
How does it go that he...
somewhere in a village in Tibet and falls off the horse and breaks his leg. Bad, is it good or is it bad? Well, then when the army came through the village to recruit... And
he couldn't get recruited because he had a broken leg.
So
the broken leg was actually a good thing.
So that was a good thing because it entertained some...
Right, and then there was like a series of... Yeah.
It's like a parable, then it went on. got sick or something, and then somebody had to walk. Is that good or bad? Oh yes, because then they rescued the person who'd fallen off the bridge.
So what's the moral of that story?
That nothing is intrinsically good or bad, it's how you relate to it.
Right, hey, your perception of that situation. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I think that kind of relates to that idea of things being projected by your mind, because generally when you break your leg, your mind's projecting this is terrible, but then later on, when the armies come through and you didn't get recruited, then you're thinking, actually, this is quite good, fortunate. So you can see both of those are coming from the mind, they're projected onto it. It's still the same broken leg. Yeah. Mm.
Very hard to do. Especially for those friends.
Yeah, but I think the point here is that just being aware of that is very helpful. So, well, just being aware that these things are not intrinsically good or bad, so that and that makes them less powerful, I think. So you have this bad situation, think, okay, this is appearing to me as quite bad right now, but I am aware that this is sort of labelled by my mind bad because of these situations. So even though you might not be able to stop labelling it bad, your broken leg, you can start to think about, well, maybe there are some good things about this, like I'm forced to stop and, slow down for 6 weeks or whatever. Yeah. Yes.
I imagine there's a bit of a distinction to be made between the Buddhist definition of happiness, which is more in peace with your practice, rather than people access that
Mm.
and what we're talking about in a situation where a bad thing like breaking your leg can happen to you, and you can still have that inner peace of mind about that situation.
Mhm.
You're not happy about it. So I think the Buddhist type of happiness is quite different.
It's
to what
acceptance.
anyone would relate
Yeah.
to.
I think happiness is an inadequate descriptor. I think acceptance. It's kind of such is.
I'm not sure it's really the same as what people normally refer to as
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure. Yeah, maybe. But I'm just thinking, like, in that situation where you've broken your leg and then you're starting to see some benefit in that, then wouldn't you say that is actually a happier state of mind than the one where you just feel thinking this is terrible? So it's slightly happier. A bit more freedom.
No, it's more that it sort of
Yeah.
gets back to that sense of acceptance that you don't
Acceptance, yeah.
as good, bad, or other. It's just it is what it is. I mean that's the whole premise for mindfulness-based stress reduction. The chronic pain stuff. It's being curious about the experience
Right.
and not attached. That pain is just unbearable.
Mm.
It's working around it and writing it out kind of thing. So again, it's not the experience, it's intrinsically good or bad, it's how you relate to it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think pain's a really good example. Like, you're sitting in meditation and you're experiencing pain, then you can see how it can appear to your mind in different ways. It's not like just there and it's terrible all the time. You can sort of, investigate the pain. And in practices, or the practice of patience, for example, it's talked about quite a lot, that this very difficult situation, like, for example, someone verbally attacking you, so generally we think, oh, this is a terrible situation and I should just fight back or run away or whatever. But in the meditations on patience, what you're trying to do is see that there is some benefit in this situation. For example, you can develop strength or fortitude or resilience by experiencing these difficult situations and gradually experiencing more and more difficult situation. You make your mind stronger so that you can gradually become more tolerant of more and more stressful situations. So it's a way of developing your mind by experiencing these difficulties. So that completely changes your attitude to that situation of that person, verbally attacking you. Becomes something useful, even. Yeah. So, yeah, as you say, it's about your perspective and how you view the situation. But that also emphasises that the thing is not inherently good or bad. So, which is different to how we normally think. We think, inherently awful person, inherently beautiful person, inherently delicious coffee. But we sort of tend to forget that these are things projected on by our mind. Yeah.
or a bit esoteric, because in life it's really, really hard. Because you sprain your ankle, the holiday's shit, you lose your luggage, the baby cries, you get sick, your best friend dies, your mother's got dementia. I mean, you know, we've all got suffering. So
Yeah.
again, it's kind of trying to put the roadblock in there and say, okay, it's not the thing, it's how I'm relating to that thing.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it's really hard.
But even I think just knowing that you have some control over how you experience this problem in itself, I think is quite powerful, I would say. And it stops you from feeling like this thing's happening to me. It's more like I have some control over my experience of this problem, you know, and to varying degrees, as you say, some problems are so overwhelming, but others are more manageable, you know, like a grumpy boss, for example. You know, you can really get to you, or you can sort of think about it in a different way, and it can, you know, be something positive. Yeah. That's the idea, anyway. Yeah. And I think just knowing that that's possible, I think that's the point I'm trying to make. Yeah. That you have that freedom. Or that degree of control over how you experience the world. Okay, thank you. Any more questions before we finish? Hopefully that's all clear. Attachment and aversion, projections from our mind, causing us problems. All right, thank you for listening, and see you.